Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well. We're going to keep looking at the book of James. Last week in the Indonesian service, if you were watching us on WhatsApp or YouTube, we talked about words, how James introduces words and the impact of words more than any other topic in his book. Of these 12 themes that James talks about, the one that he spends the most time dealing with or mentioning throughout every chapter of his book is something related to words. So to help us understand the point of what he's trying to get at today in chapter 4, I want you to think about times where you are just so full, like your stomach cannot fit any other food. I mean, maybe it's at Thanksgiving time and your capacity has just been filled up because there's so much food. That's where the word fulfillment comes from, is that feeling of satisfaction with people, satisfaction with life. But we also have fulfillment in God, satisfaction with God alone. And that concept is that we are so full, we don't need any more. That at Thanksgiving time, I've eaten so much, I can't eat anymore. I'm full. Fulfillment means that you have reached this capacity where you have everything you need and you don't need any more. Now, I remember visiting my wife's family in Texas, and they have delicious food. My wife is from Mexico, and I love Mexican food. And so when we went to Dallas, I remember we visited about 5 different homes of friends or family. We went to her best friend's house first, and they brought out the rice and the beans and the carne asada and the al pastor and the tortillas and the jalapenos. And, it was like so good. So, of course, I love eating, and I can usually eat a lot. And I had a whole big plate of food, and it was so good. They said, they were happy to see me eat that much. You want some more? And I said, of course, another plate just like this, right? And I ate 2 big plates of food, and we visited, and we had a good time. Well, then we went to the next house, and it was almost the same thing. The foods were slightly different, so I enjoyed that because it was really good and a little different. And I had a plate and then a little bit more. And then we went to the 3rd house, and it was the same type of situation, and 4th house and 5th house. And each house, I was not prepared for the quantity of food that they were hoping that I would eat. Now, if I only went to one of those homes, I would have been great because every house had delicious food. And every house, they wanted to give me more. But the problem was I kept going to another house after another house after another house. When we got to the 5th house, it was the house of Patty's sister where we sort of stayed the longest. And they were cooking, and they brought out that plate. And I told Patty, I said, you have got to tell them. I'm so happy I'm here. I'm so thankful for the food. I cannot eat this. Literally, if I put this in my stomach, everything will come out. My stomach is so full, it's hard right now. It's bulging and it's hard, not in a good way, right? And I was just so completely full. Now, James talks about words in the context of how they will change when we have been fulfilled, when we are full of a relationship with God, when our fulfillment comes from that. One of the things that will impact are the words that we use. And one of the things that our words do is they impact how we treat people. We either treat people very well by being proactive and using encouraging words, or we actually treat people very poorly by speaking badly against them. Look at this out of verses 7 and 8 in Proverbs chapter 18. So this is in the Old Testament. Proverbs 18, verse 7 and 8 says this: the words of the foolish people will drag them down. They are trapped by what they say. The words of anyone who talks about others are like tasty bites of food. They go down deep inside of you. Words aren't something on the surface that just hit and fade away. That words are like a piece of food that as you eat it here, it goes down deep and it nourishes your soul. Now, if you eat good food, it helps you to be healthy. But if you eat rotten or bad food, it actually gets you sick. The same are true of words, that they are like the book of Proverbs says, tasty bites of food. They go down deep inside of you, and they will stick with you. Now, if they are good words, they will encourage you, and they will be things that you can hold on to in the future of what people who you trust and believe in have said of you. But if they are painful words, they will stick with you as well. And they can actually cause us to sickness, or to a lack of health, or to a lack of self-worth, or to a lack of self-confidence. That's the power of words. That's why James is talking about words so much. So we looked at chapter 3 last week in the Indonesian service. Today we'll look at James chapter 4. I'm going to read out of verses 11 and 12. It says this: brothers and sisters, do not slander. And if you're slandering is a little unclear for you, basically means don't speak against or don't speak evil. Okay, so don't slander each other. Don't speak evil against each other. Don't speak against each other. Anybody who speaks against their brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. Now, when you judge the law, you're not keeping it, but you are sitting in judgment of the law. There's only one lawgiver and judge, that's God. The one who's able to save and destroy, that's God. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor? What's interesting is this whole idea of judging comes from the Old Testament. It comes from Leviticus 19, verse 18, where it says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And according to Jesus, this is the second commandment. Second and greatest commandment is Matthew 22, right? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. That's the greatest. But the second is this from Leviticus, to love your neighbor as yourself. So when James is saying, if you slander or speak against your neighbor, you're not following the law. What does the law say? The law says you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So you're breaking the law. Now, maybe your neighbor's not the greatest person. Maybe your family member is not the greatest person. Maybe your boss or coworker is not the greatest person. Maybe the person who just cut you off driving or stole your parking space when you've been waiting for 45 minutes at campus to get that spot. Maybe they're not the greatest person, but it doesn't change what God wants. It doesn't change that he says you should love your neighbor as yourself. And so who am I to say other people are selfish? Right? I'm selfish too. Who am I to say they're impatient? I'm impatient too. Who am I to say they're insensitive? I'm insensitive too. Right? So really, if we have a proper perspective, if we could keep the big picture in mind, everything that people struggle with, we struggle with as well. It doesn't change the way that God has set out how to live life well in following his law, that we need to love other people. So don't judge people. Don't talk badly about people. Keep in mind that's not using judgment, right? The scriptures are very clear that we should use judgment. And when you use judgment to assess people or situations as being healthy or not healthy, helpful or not helpful, you are using judgment, right? Even in John chapter 7, Jesus said this: do not judge according to appearance, right? But judge with righteous judgment. So he's telling us to judge. So use your judgment, right? But don't judge selfishly. Don't judge based on the outside. And if you love your neighbor as yourself, you will be less prone to judge them. So stop judging by what you see and judge the right way, is basically what Jesus is saying. So often when we talk about people, it's not the greatest, right? It's not to build them up. And really, God knows what's going on inside of our heart when we say things about people. God doesn't judge like we do. We look on the outside and we make judgments, but God can actually see into our hearts, which we see in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7, and that's how God can judge. The only problem is that we often can't. But to put this better in the context of James chapter 4, let me read some verses from the beginning of the chapter. Verses 1 through 3 says this: what causes quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and you fight. You don't have because you don't ask of God. And when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your own pleasures. So something's wrong, right? Something's lacking. Something's not complete. And what that is, James is actually saying, is fulfillment in God. That sense of feeling full of God. So because we're not fulfilled in God, then we want to find fulfillment in other things. And when we don't get those things, James is saying it causes fights and quarrels among you. It causes things that we shouldn't do. There's a battle that rages on within you, right? He says, doesn't that come from the desires that battle within you? You want something, but you don't get it. So then you treat people poorly. But if our fulfillment is in God, that is something God will answer, right? That's why James is saying, if you pray, God will give you what you need, because James knows the biggest thing that we need is God. That our sense of fulfillment from God actually frees us from the sense of need or longing to find fulfillment in other things. So while I love people and I love my friends and I have amazing people in my life, if I'm completely fulfilled in God, if those friends turn on me or if those friends leave me, it would be painful, it would be disappointing, but it wouldn't knock me down. It wouldn't affect me because I'm still with God and I still have God, right? If I find my fulfillment in material possessions and all of those things get destroyed or they get stolen, I would be devastated, right? But if my fulfillment is in God, those things wouldn't lead me to act any differently. Losing everything, it would be painful, it would be hard, but it wouldn't cause me to change who I am, because my fulfillment would come from God. Does that make sense? I hope it does. So he goes on to say that really that's the right thing to pray for. The right thing to pray for is us to find fulfillment in God. And as we do, it will change how we talk. That it will actually lead us to love our neighbor as ourselves, which is Leviticus, which is the law. Keep in mind, James in chapter 1 talks about this idea of brokenness moving to wholeness or completeness or maturity. And he talks about it multiple times because he knows how broken we are inside. So when we actually do these things, it's a sign of completeness or maturity. And it's a part of the step or process for us to be complete and mature, is when we actually talk about people the right way or don't say anything evil or bad or slanderous about them, even when we're hurt. It shows that we are maturing, but it also helps us to mature at the same time. That whole idea of fulfillment or satisfaction, right? That to make us full, that's what James is saying we need to pursue. That's what James is saying we need to have. Because this is what Matthew writes in chapter 12, verse 36 and 37. I tell you that everyone will have to give an account on the day of judgment for every empty word that they have spoken. For by your words you will be set free, and by your words you will be condemned. So Jesus actually shows us that our words are going to impact our eternity. That's probably one of the reasons why James brings up words so much. And the way we treat people over and over again is that our words could actually bring us freedom, or our words are going to be held against us and they will condemn us. We will be innocent or we will be guilty based largely on the words that we use about people. And the degree or to which we have found fulfillment in God will impact the words that come out of our mouth. Because if things don't go our way, but we are completely fulfilled in God, we're satisfied, we're okay, right? But if they don't go our way and we've found fulfillment in other things, then we will turn on people and speak about people and speak evil or slanderous things or gossip or condemn them or grumble about them or tear them down or just hurt them. But really what James is trying to say is that as fulfillment happens, we change from the inside out. It's like that tiny morsel of food that goes down and nourishes our body. Let God be the one who brings us fulfillment, and we find fulfillment in, and we will move towards completeness and the life that God always intended for us. God bless.